Hi and welcome back. My name is Austin and we are officially less than a month away from hitting the debt ceiling, making us default on our debt and possibly sending us into the worst economic crisis we have seen in the last 100 years. And we are only 20 days away. And the Treasury Secretary has been calling CEOs of the mega corporations to warn them about the potential financial crisis in the US if it is not able to raise the debt ceiling. So in this video, I'm going to tell you what she's telling the CEOs, and I'm going to tell you about the debt ceiling crisis and why it is important and why you should be paying attention, because frankly, if this isn't taken seriously, this could be a global crisis. We first need to talk about an issue that pops up every couple of years, the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is what some people call the debt limit, and to simply put, it's the maximum amount the US government is allowed to borrow. It's much like the credit limit on a credit card. Same deal, just with a lot higher of a credit limit. And by higher, I mean up to the tune of $31 trillion. And a lot of people are really confused by this. Like, where's the debt? Who do we owe? Why do we owe them? And why is this cool looking debt clock keep increasing like it's no one's business? Well, the US government sells Treasury Securities, or basically Treasury bonds, to basically anyone who wants to buy them. And currently the biggest buyer of these Treasury Securities are countries like Japan and China. And the reason why countries and investors like buying US securities is because, for the purpose of this video, the US has never defaulted on its debt. And that's a big deal because holding these treasuries means you are essentially guaranteed to get your money back. So essentially the US debt ceiling limits the amount of treasuries the government can sell to investors. And it's considered debt because the investors need to be paid back after they buy the securities. So that was the debt ceiling. Now I want you to put that in the back of your head because it is different than the federal budget. The federal budget is also set by Congress, but the budget sets the amount that the US will spend this year. When the federal budget is set and calls for more to be spent than the amount that comes in, this is called deficit spending. Let me run you through an example. Let's say the US takes in $100 from taxes, but the budget says we are supposed to spend $130 this year. Then that is obviously a deficit of $30. So now in order to pay that $30 deficit, we need to sell the securities like I mentioned earlier. Then that will put us $30 closer to the debt ceiling. In personal finance, it's always taught that you never spend more than you have and you should never go on credit. Well, the government has not taken my advice. In fact, the US usually runs these large annual deficits quite often. So often that they have to readdress this issue every couple years. In the last 23 years, the US has actually passed a deficit budget 22 times. And 22 for 23 is a great batting average, but this is not a stat we should be particularly proud of. It's important to note that when the debt limit is increased, it does not mean that spending also increases. Remember, the budgets are already voted on by Congress before it even hits the debt ceiling. This is why this issue is really dumb and just weird. Congress votes on the federal budget, then they pass the budget knowing it's gonna hit the debt ceiling sometime that year, and then when it hits the debt ceiling, everyone's acting so surprised and scared that it happened, but we knew this was coming. This really has become a tool that one party uses to stronghold the other party into getting their way. That's a political issue, different topic. The real problem is occurring right now because the US actually hit the debt limit of $31 trillion all the way back in January of this year. So Austin, that must mean we already defaulted on our debt. Well, no, not quite. Once we hit the debt ceiling, Janet Yellen said that the government had to take extraordinary measures to keep everything operating so the US didn't default on its debt. This means that the government still couldn't sell more securities. Instead, they were forced to take funds from other and different areas. They were essentially just scraping enough money together just to survive a little longer. With funds pulled from these areas, this meant the government could limp along until it hit the X date. That has a nice doomsday sound. Well, that date has come, and the White House released this statement. The Congressional Budget Office has also forecasted there is a significantly greater risk that the Treasury Secretary will run out of funds by early June because of the weaker than expected tax collections. So this X date, aka June 1st, is 22 days away. And yesterday, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary for the US, was personally calling CEOs to warn them about the consequences of what will happen if the debt ceiling isn't raised. Let me talk to you about what information was on that phone call so you too can be informed. The economists at the White House outlined 3 different scenarios if we don't raise the debt ceiling in the next 20 days. The first scenario is being called political brinkmanship. Brinkmanship is as it sounds. If the brink is the X date, then this scenario will be taken all the way until the X date, and at that very last, they will make a new deal on the debt ceiling. While this is a very risky scenario, experts are calling this the most likely outcome, and the stock market has already priced this in. And the economist part of the White House team ran different models to show show how much it would affect GDP and jobs. They found that the brinkmanship scenario would cost 200,000 jobs and GDP would decline by 0.3%. So we will still lose 200,000 jobs and we will still be making the X date on the debt ceiling. And the story stays relatively the same on the next scenario, the short default. The short default scenario would consist of raising the debt ceiling a couple days after the X date. So we hit the X date and then we come to a solution. Well, this would cost 500,000 jobs across America, and it would decline GDP by 0.6%. Now, these two scenarios suck, yes, but they are nothing compared to what would be a protracted default. This is why it would be so important to find a solution. A protracted default is defined by the economist of 3 months with no solution on the debt ceiling, essentially meaning defaulting on our debt for 3 months. This would shock America and it would shock the world because we would lose 8.3 million jobs and have a loss of 6.1% GDP. Now, the Great Depression, 12 million jobs were lost, so 8.3 million would likely put us into a depression scenario. It doesn't stop there either, because during the Great Depression, the stock market fell by 45%, and the economists are predicting that a protracted default would also lose about the same percent, about 45–50%. So a protracted default would most likely put us into a depression, and no one would ever want to buy securities again, and we would instantly lose world power status. This is why this is so serious. Republicans are wanting spending cuts before they approve the new debt ceiling, and the Democrats, they have their list of requests too. They are currently both meeting often to try to come to a solution, but now is not the time to be playing games since we are only 20 days away from an X date. I agree, we probably do need some spending cuts, but this is also a situation that the debt ceiling needs to be raised no matter what. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, because this has huge consequences for both of us. The yearly budget has already been approved, so it's really a political game at this point. The budget was approved knowing it was going to hit the debt ceiling, but it's scary to play a political game such close to this X date. Guys, if you could please like the video, that helps me out so much and it helps to spread the word to more people. This is a very serious situation, so I appreciate your time and I hope I have taught you something. Let me know your opinions down below and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.